Today is the 4th day of our summer 7-day session, 15th of January 2014. And we'll be taking up another story today from The Hidden Lamp, Stories from 25 Centuries of Awakened Women, edited by Florence Kaplow and Susan Moon. And this story is called Ling Zhao's Helping, and it's from 8th century China. One day, layman Pang and his daughter, Ling Zhao, were out selling bamboo baskets. Coming down off a bridge, the layman stumbled and fell. When Ling Zhao saw this, she ran to her father's side and threw herself to the ground. "What are you doing?" cried the layman. "I saw you fall, so I'm helping," replied Ling Zhao. "Luckily no one was looking," remarked the layman. So, layman Pang is a famous Zen adept. His full name is Pang Yun. He's also known as in Japanese as Hokoji. He came from southern Yunnan province, and he trained with two great masters, Shuto and Masu, Sekito and Baso in Japanese. And there's a little bit of biographical material in Encyclopedia of Eastern Philosophy and Religion. He came from a family of minor functionaries, and as was traditional then, he studied the Confucian classics, but he became acutely aware of the limitations of both just studying texts and of owning stuff, worldly possessions. And one day he packed all his possessions into a boat and sank it in the river in front of his house. And then, accompanied by his daughter, Ling Zhao, who's the other protagonist in this story, he wandered through China visiting great masters, and this was the height of the golden age of Zen. So it was a time of great, many great masters and much creativity. And he would visit these masters and train with them, practice with them. He also would practice in caves on his way, and Ling Zhao, of course, practiced too. No doubt she was adult at this point, and she would have been going to sessions and sitting with him as well. And she became a great adept too, and is really central to this story. But a little more about layman Pang, just for you to get a flavour of him. At his first meeting with Shuto, his first teacher, he asked him a question: "Who is he who is not dependent upon the 10,000 things?" And the 10,000 things is a way of talking about everything, all phenomena. So this was layman Pang's question to the master. Immediately, Shuto held Pang Yun's mouth shut, and insight dawned on the layman. Later on, Shuto questioned layman Pang about his life, and he answered with a poem which is very famous in Chinese Zen, and Zen everywhere, in fact. And this is his poem. There is nothing special about my daily affairs. I am simply in spontaneous harmony with them, clinging to nothing and also rejecting nothing. I encounter no resistance and am never separate. What do I care about the pomp of purple robes? The pure summit was never sullied by so much as a fleck of dust. The wondrous action of supernatural forces I find in hauling water and cutting wood. It's really expressing here what might be considered the ideal Zen life. To see the extraordinary in the ordinary. Carrying in water and chopping wood. Washing the dishes and paying the taxes. Shurto confirmed Layman Pang as a Dharma heir, but he's still trained, and he went to visit Matsu, the great Tang master, and he asked him the same question. Who is it who is not dependent upon the 10,000 things? And Matsu answered, this I'll tell you when you drink up the waters of the West River in a single gulp. And these were the words that triggered in Layman Pang Great Awakening. He also, this Layman Pang had a wife and a son, both of whom were also highly realized adepts. The wife appears in a number of stories. Not so much is known about the son, just that he worked the land growing food for the family, and they all, four of them, lived together at times. I guess when Layman Pang and his daughter weren't on the road selling their baskets that they made at home. Ling Zhao's name means spirit shining. And she certainly shines in this little story. They're off on the road, going around with their wares, and they're coming down off a bridge, and Pang trips and falls. And his daughter immediately rushes up and throws herself down on the ground next to him. Not surprisingly, given what she's just done, her father says, "What are you doing?" Actually, he knew perfectly well what she was doing. But for our sakes in the story, he asks this question. And Ling Zhao replies, "I saw you fall, so I'm helping." I saw you fall, so I'm helping. In what way was Ling Zhao helping her father? In The Hidden Lamp, the teacher who was commenting on this story, Joan Sutherland, says, Ling Zhao's action obliterates the idea that there is a helper and a helped. Compassion isn't a commodity we deliver, but a commitment, according to Chan, to help liberate the intimacy already inherent in any situation. What is most intimate? The koans suggest that we ask. Usually, the most intimate response to another's difficulty begins with a willingness not to flee. fleeing can take the form of abandoning the situation, and it can also mean escaping into helping, into a whole constellation of ideas about what ought to happen. Intimacy is being willing to stay and accompany and listen, to be vulnerable and surprised and flexible. It is a willingness to fall with someone else and see what becomes possible when we do. Ling Zhao's falling was most intimate. So often we flee suffering. We shut down. And as Joan Sutherland says here, this can take different forms. It can be an actual running from a painful situation. And we do this when we encounter other people's suffering. And of course we also do it often when faced with our own, which of course makes it much more difficult to face other people's suffering if we haven't done that investigating into our own, and we'll talk about this more. But probably everybody has also experienced this other kind of fleeing that Sutherland mentions, escaping into helping, into a whole constellation of ideas about what ought to happen. We might bring a trouble, something that's weighing on us, to somebody, and immediately that person moves into fixing mode and suggests this or that. And it doesn't really help us, because it's not what we were really needing. What we often need more is just somebody to listen, to resonate, to get alongside us, not to try to tell us this or that. And that's actually exactly what Ling Zhao does here. She literally gets alongside her father. Sometimes people will say, when somebody tells them some trouble, I know how you feel. I know exactly how you feel. That can be a kind of flight too. Because how can you know exactly how somebody feels? There's something that happens before knowing. It has no words attached to it. We could call it a kind of a precursor to or the basis of compassion. So what needs to happen really before even compassion kicks in? We'll read a little bit from a book called The Lost Art of Compassion by Lorne Ladner. And he talks here a little bit about empathy. He says the word empathy was introduced into the English language in the 20th century, derived from the German word Einfühlung, which meant the ability to feel into another's experience. In psychological literature, empathy has come to mean the ability to understand another person's inner experiences. Heinz Kohut, who has written a great deal on the role of empathy in personality development, refers to it as vicarious introspection. Empathy involves relating our direct observations of and feelings about others to our memories, reason and imagination in order to develop some understanding of what they are thinking and feeling. Empathy is a skill or ability similar in some ways to the ability to sing or dance. We're all born with a certain natural ability to empathize. How much we develop that natural ability depends upon effort and practice. It goes on to talk about research that has shown that this empathy is a key ingredient in healthy relationships. Very important for parenting, for social responsibility, altruism. It's a part of what a factor in emotional intelligence. Also, there are correlations between empathy and healthy marriage, marital satisfaction, close family relationships, good communication, and by contrast, lack of empathy is correlated with higher degrees of anger and aggressive behaviors, sociopathy, child abuse, delinquency. He says some researchers suggest that empathy serves as a very root of human morality. Our empathic understanding of others' suffering is primarily what helps us choose not to harm them instead to help them. If we empathically resonate with another person's feelings, then causing them suffering also causes us some suffering, and this serves to restrain our behavior. There's a dimension in empathy of imagination. It's being able to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes, to step out of our narrow self-concern. He says developing empathy requires the bravery to face others' suffering. It should come as no surprise that understanding other people's thoughts and feelings largely entails understanding their suffering. As we gain empathic understanding of other people's inner lives, what we see is much like what we saw in our own minds when we first began looking within. Often we find that others are worse off than we are. Empathy shows us that many people are almost continually following thoughts of attachment, aversion and indifference, and that they are living lives based largely on projections and driven by afflictive emotions, which inevitably leads to much frustration, exhaustion and heartache. This is something that happens especially if we scratch beyond the surface of things. Generally people try to put up a brave front, but under that there may be a lot of loneliness, anger, alienation. He says it may seem that facing others' suffering will be depressing, discouraging, or overwhelming. Of course, each of us has to proceed into new psychic terrains at a pace we can handle. But in general, increasing our empathy leads to positive results. Our relationships with others become based less on projections and more on reality. As we get to know others' minds, we learn to understand and work better with our own minds. As you empathize with people who have spent much time following the mind of addiction, anger, worry, or manic excitement, You gain a greater understanding of what's happening to yourself each time you allow yourself to get caught up in one of these mental states. It would be difficult to enumerate all the many benefits that come to our lives and our relationships as we cultivate empathy. Empathy is an absolutely essential ingredient for intimacy, love, and compassion. If you're not willing to face others' suffering, then you cannot develop compassion for them. It's also important that we explore and understand what blocks empathy, the mechanisms that prevent us from feeling what's going on with others and with what's going on in ourselves at times. We were looking into this a little bit in the last talk. This notion of self-view as being what stands between us and other people. And we can return to that article that teaching was from, an article called Holistic Kindness, Metta Parami by Ajahn Sucitto. There's a section in this article that's entitled Start with Empathy. In it, Ajahn Sucitto says that although we may not be performing gross acts of hatred and violence, we're going to be blocked one way or another in terms of our ability to be empathic and to have goodwill towards people. And that's really what the loving kindness practice brings out. It sounds, when we hear about practicing loving kindness, it sounds like it's all going to be sweetness and roses. But in fact, to do this practice brings us up against the very opposite of our sweetness. It brings us up against our resistance, our anger, our resentment. All of these things in doing loving kindness practice, we have to face. He says that our lack of empathy flavors consciousness and is the source of many problems. Sometimes we are blinded by the instinctual drive that assumes that selfish greed and ambition is the way to happiness. Sometimes it's that ego drive of becoming that wants to be better, more attractive or successful than another. Sometimes it's ill will over a difference of opinion and viewpoint. We can cling very tightly to our feeling of being right. The thing to acknowledge is that this is just the mind acting in accordance with the basic conditioning of self-view. It's not permanent truth, not who you are, but the current readout of the ongoing line of affects and responsives, now reflective, now eager, now caring or restless. So when we come up against these blocks to empathy, whether it's the selfish drive to get what we want and get ahead, which is so approved of by our society, or whether it's clinging to a particular opinion, whatever it is, we don't have to feel guilty about this. We can just acknowledge that it's self-view. It's this conditioning that we inherit. It's not who we are. It's not some kind of permanent truth, but just our conditioning. We can also remind ourselves of this when we see a lack of empathy in others. Okay, this person's really caught up in self-view right now. Ling Zhao gives us a beautiful demonstration of what no self-view looks like. Willingness to just completely fall down with another person, to put herself right there, total openness, and even a kind of helplessness in her action, and not knowing what the right thing to do is. What might that be like if we didn't know, if we didn't try to immediately fix the situation? If we just tried to be present for the other person or for oneself when distressed. Ajahn Suchita says that if we can do this, if we can just regard the mind as it actually is, then compassion arises. Compassion and even awe. He says, you realize that many minds don't know that much about kindness because they haven't received it. Hurtful, abusive things may have been done or said to them. Appreciation and warmth may have been in short supply. Consequently, their minds can have sour flavourings that attach to their sense of self and others, and engenders aversive or mistrustful responses. There's a wonderful book, a novel called Black Swan Green by David Mitchell, and it really looks at bullying, and my guess is that it was based on his own experience as a child. And in the book, at the end, he stands up. This little boy stands up to his bullies, but at the same time, he also gets to understand them when he sees the way these kids are treated by their own parents, abused really by their parents. There's always behind every action, there's causes. Ajahn Suchita says a little bit about the mind that is behind cruelty and active unkindness. He talks about a distorted relational sense in which pleasure and personal security comes from besting others, even through making fun of or scapegoating them. A boundary has been created which blocks empathy, and it doesn't even feel bad at first. Getting more than another, putting others down, or taking revenge has the same sweet burst to it as a drug. That's why it takes over. It's a very, very perceptive comment. The same sweet burst to it as a drug. There's a kind of pleasure in it that's short-lived, and it sets up the person for more suffering. But it can be addictive. And like any other drug, it numbs one's own pain. It keeps that pain at bay. And there's a broad spectrum of impairment that we suffer as a result of what has been done to us. From one extreme, this cruelty that's being talked about here, and that's at the other end of the spectrum is numbness or inability to feel, and everything in between. But it's not totally a matter of not having choice, obviously. There are people who suffer enormous abuse and manage to make a good life, become kind parents, good parents. It can be enough for somebody in their life to have one loving person that they come in contact with, even for a short time, especially if it's in the formative years, the early years. I know somebody who was abused as a child, beaten, also in the years of this, there was a sexual element to it. She's beaten by her father, who made her take off all her clothes for these beatings. But for a while, early on in her life, she was sent off to live with her grandmother. And this grandmother was a kind, healthy person. It wasn't for very long that she was with her, maybe 2 or 3 years, when she was between a big toddler and 4 or so. But it was enough for her to learn and be exposed to what loving looked like, felt like. Wasn't that she didn't have troubles later on, but she found a way through them. She could, in some sense, somehow go back to that experience, draw on it, even though it was very brief. And she has really been able to leave behind many of the effects of that early abuse. She didn't get hooked on that drug of seeking revenge some way. One of the key elements in empathy is letting down our guard, exposing our vulnerability. Ajahn Suchito tells a story of a friend of his who, young man who drove his truck into a petrol station, and the guy who was operating the pumps saw that he had a photo of Ajahn Chah pasted on his dashboard, and this is the petrol station guy was a young guy too, and he started to sort of make fun of this picture, asking about who the bald guy was, who this weirdo that was pasted in his car was. And instead of taking offence, the young man was just pretty open with him. He said that he'd been a young tough before reading Ajahn Chah's books, and he'd felt really depressed at how meaningless life seemed. He hadn't known what to do with his life, and he felt lonely, like he was just wasting his time. And even sometimes he felt like killing himself. And then before he could get the rest of his story out, the petrol station guy said, You mean you feel like that too? Empathy happened. Two people resonated. Ajahn Sujido comments, so it is. Someone dares to tell the truth about suffering, and the note of empathy is struck. Suddenly, the conflict, the "you're so different from me," fall away. No one has changed anything except the self-other lineup. But in that moment of empathy, there is a mutual deepening. So it is. The way out of ill will is not through judging who's right, but through finding common ground. Kindness or non-aversion begins with empathy, the sense that we're all in this same samsaric ocean together, struggling in the floods. Nothing had changed except the self-other lineup, as he puts it. The jeering was dropped, the making fun of. It's just two human beings, two suffering beings. In our story, Ling Zhao and her dad, after Ling Zhao falls down next to him and says, "I saw you fall, so I'm helping," Layman Pang replies, "Luckily, no one was looking." And Joan Sutherland comments on this. She says, Layman Pang's final remark does not mean that he's worried about some third person judging the event. The one who fortunately isn't looking is ourselves. That is our inner tendency to monitor and pass judgment, distancing us from our interactions even as they're happening. How free it is when we aren't keeping score. How potentially generous a life lived with no one looking. Layman Pang didn't experience any embarrassment when he fell down, looking around to see if anyone had seen him make a fool of himself, pratfall. And he certainly didn't think to himself, "Oh, I'm an enlightened person, I shouldn't fall down. I'm Layman Pang." Most likely he didn't think anything. Just whoop! But he could perhaps have thought afterwards, "Oh, this body, pulled down earthward. How marvellous. I live on this blue globe, stuck to it by the force of gravity. How extraordinary." We'll finish now with some more of Joan Sutherland's comments, where she really sets this little tale in a very large canvas, an infinite canvas, in fact. Ling Zhao's gesture suggests that we are all falling together, lifetime after lifetime, through the universe. Right now we are falling through this world, which holds out an invitation to us. Come see what life is like here. We find that it's made of flame and water, wind and earth, sorrow and beauty, love and fear, light and dark, and everything in between. As we fall, if we pick and choose, instead of accepting all of life as it offers itself, we are in some way refusing the invitation. If we say to life in this world, "I'll take your sunsets, but leave your diseases," we are being stingy in a way that hurts ourselves most of all. If we say, "I'll take the beautiful song of the tui, but not the mosquitoes. Or I'll take myself at 25, fresh, attractive, but not myself at 55, body starting to fall apart. We're missing something. We're selling ourselves short. Life is all of a piece. One reality. How can we appreciate it? How can we appreciate ourselves, our families, people we don't know, people on the other side of the world, animals, plants as well, inanimate things? We'll stop here and recite the 4 vows.